What makes debt such an interesting subject matter, Joey? Because every time we talk about it, it seems like we bring a lot of people to the table.
I think it's just because so many people struggle with it and that it has such a bad connotation. I think people just have heard so many bad things about it. They just immediately say, I got to get rid of it. Got to get rid of it.
I think there's an opposite side of that too. I think there's a lot of pride in saying that I have no debt.
Yeah. And I also think it's easy. It's an easy thing to solve for. It's like, it's there. I can put extra money towards it. It's gone. It's just kind of a simple thing.
But it's not so easy. Yes, maybe I can say that's something I can attack as opposed to learning how to create a passive income stream that I've never taken the time to invest in.
That's what I meant, by the way.
But we know that so oftentimes people in search of getting out of debt keep finding themselves deeper and deeper in it because that's their only mindset, that they have not challenged themselves to learn other ideas. There are basics to finance, and debt is one of those basics that we need to understand better. But also, we got to get creative. We got to think outside the box. Today's podcast, today's interview with the coaches is all about how do we think about debt? Is there a practical way to get out of it? And if you haven't already, take advantage of our offer to ask one of our coaches these types of questions. And how do we use the infinite banking concept to help us eliminate debt, use debt in our favor, as well as to accelerate our speed to get to financial freedom? Go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/free call so that you can take part. Now, Joey, let's belly up.
Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
Welcome into the IBC Roundtable, where each week we go deep into your favorite subject, the infinite banking concept. I'm sitting around the table with the best coaches in the nation, and I want to introduce you to them. To my right is my co-host, the Italian Stallion, Mr. Joey Murray. What's up, Joey?
Hey, I'm fired up.
Good to see you, man. To your right, we've got the Indiana Jones of finance, the man that goes deep forward looking for treasure, downtown, Ernie Brown. How are you, Ernie?
I'm doing great, Russ.
Sorry, I kind of fubbed that one. I was trying to get it out for you. Joey's got me tickled today. I failed.
I'm not physically tickling you, but you got tickled with something that I said.
Forgive me.
I forgive you for the mess up, not for the name.
Well, but here's the thing is that sometimes people are like, well, Russ, why do you like to call him the Indiana Jones? I think the way that Ernie goes looking for stuff, he is always trying to uncover opportunities when I'm talking to you about someone's situation. And I just think of a financial archaeologist or something that to me would be what an Indiana Jones and a man's man.
Yeah. Not a gold digger,
not a gold digger.
Someone who goes deep digging for gold.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, let's move on across the table. I have the man between two ferns, our resident pilot, Mark the Gooch Haraguchi. What's up, Mark? Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. I saw that the other night, by the way, with my daughter. We watched Truman Show.
It's a good one.
We'll come back to that one another time. The man of legends, the man with the $1 million smile, Mr. Incredible, JD Hill. What's up, JD?
Hey, how's everybody doing? I will tell you, I'm excited because I'm on my last $1 million smile Invisalign trays, and I'm almost done.
Ooh.
And that is exciting for me.
Yes,
dude, that thing works. I had no idea that you had braces at all.
Well, truth be told, this is the third time I've had them. I had braces twice in high school. And then this is my third time now I've had an Invisalign. And y'all have heard me say this before. Those who pay attention. I paid for these, and I am paying attention.
There you go.
I mean, when we were saying $1 million smile, it was literally.
Yeah, literally. That's right.
you're well on your way.
Well, I'll tell you,
and
I'm a believer in orthodontia for sure. I keep going back.
that's right. Proudly sponsored by the local orthodontist of Fort Worth, Texas. All right. Well, today's subject matter is not about names. It's not about orthodontia, which first time I've ever heard that. But what it is about a practical case study to paying down debt using the infinite banking concept. If this is the first time you're entering into this podcast, you're listening to a very specific subject matter that we refer to as the foundational tool to everything that we do. And if you don't know what that is and you'd like to jump on a 15-minute call, we encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. Go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/free call, and you can talk to one of these coaches about how does that tool impact your ability to get to financial freedom faster. Now, part of that journey, Joey, is not only having passive income, but it's also mitigating and eliminating unnecessary expenses. Debt tends to be one of those things.
Oh, I'm so glad we're talking about this today, because debt is probably the number one thing people struggle with when they start on this path to financial freedom. And some people get it way, way wrong because they get focused in on like, oh, I just need to pay off all my debt. That's the only way to financial freedom. And unfortunately, people can be misled.
I think there's lots of question marks here, Ernie, that goes through someone's head as they're trying to figure out what to do first. What are some of those questions that you hear people asking?
How quickly do I need to accomplish this? I've got this much cash. Do I need to take all of it and direct towards this? Another one would be, should I pay off all my debt? Should I pay off some of my debt? Is there such thing as good debts and bad debts? And should I be okay with having good debts? Or I've heard that all debt is bad. Shouldn't I just get rid of it all?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of issues there. Mark, what would you say the real issue as looking at debt as a part of a plan? What should someone be thinking about?
For me, one of the things that I like to look at is, what is the total sum of that debt? And what is that costing us, right? Because there is a monthly cost, right, for debt. If you've got, say, a credit card, a car, or a mortgage or whatnot, there is a monthly cost associated with that. And then we would have to say, well, if I knew what that dollar sum was to remove that debt, how much cash flow would that free up for me? Well, I could either A, pay off the debt, free up the cash flow, right? And then now refunnel that cash to pay off the debt that I've housed inside myself. Or could I go do something else with those dollars and have those dollars generate cash for me that could not only pay for that initial purchase of that asset, but also pay for the debt as well? So can I be, as Russ likes to think, that his number one was EVA and that it won? I'm not so sure. I think the voting said otherwise, but that's essentially EVA, right? We're taking a look at what's the most efficient use of these dollars and how can we get ourselves closer to what our imagination, what our dream, what our picture of financial freedom is. And I think those are questions we've got to ask ourselves.
Well, and you were laying out that framework. If you've not had a chance to kind of go through our paying off debt like a boss course that Joey put together so eloquently, then you were just giving away some of those just nuggets in there. And let's make sure we restate that, Joey. For someone who's trying to decide, do I pay off debt? How would they look at that through a lens of clarity as opposed to just working off an opinion or a very subjective approach?
Well, a couple of things that you mentioned there, Mark, that I feel like may need a little bit of clarity. So one, if you don't even think about the opposite side of the financial freedom formula, that's passive income, like you don't know how to create passive income through buying assets, then this doesn't apply. Right? You don't even have a basis, and that's an opportunity. You need to learn what sort of assets create passive income so that you can know once you've accumulated some cash. Let's say you got $10,000 to $20,000 sitting in cash, and you've got a debt sitting over here. Let's just say it's a car loan. It's $10,000, and you owe, and it's $550 a month because you've been paying on it for a while. Or you could take that $10,000 and you could create some cash flow. And let's say it only creates $200 a month of cash flow. So that's on the passive income side. The $550 is the expense. and you say, I've got this 10,000, I can pay one of these two off, you know right off the bat which one to choose, because the 550 is greater than the 200 you could produce. So you know which one to do. But our process actually includes that there's a priority payoff guide. Russ, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, a priority payoff guide is to help you understand which debts are efficient and inefficient. And that's a little bit difficult because sometimes we've been taught that we pay off the debt with the smallest balance and we snowball the debt, if you will. And in some situation, that is the least efficient debt. And so that we can use that model, but we want to use a little bit more scientific approach than just the pay off the one with the lowest amount first. And we go through a process through the priority payoff guide. So if you're inside of our community, you go to courses, there's a debt course there that you can take, and it'll take you through those 3 steps: the emotional, the financial, and the practical way to pay off debt. So I think the real issue here, though, is should we, in light of infinite banking, because that's kind of the lens that we look at things with, should we consider using a insurance policy set up properly to pay off a debt first? That is a question that sometimes we get, because some people may say, and JD, I want you to jump into discussion. You didn't have a chance yet, but some people will say, well, does it make sense that I wait, I pay off all the debts, and then I start my infinite banking policy, and then I take that cash flow that I was paying on the debt to start my policy? What says you?
What says me? I think everybody recognizes that, we all need to be good stewards, right, of the resources that we're being fortunate enough to create and earn. And so I think it's understanding what is the proper strategy in order to pay off that debt, right? And so when I think about paying down debt, right, I'm looking at it as, do I want to pay down debt, or do I want to get that much closer to actually achieving the big picture goal, which is financial freedom?
That's good.
That's what kind of goes through my mind is not an either or, but a yes and, right? Is what I'm doing actually getting me closer to getting towards financial freedom, or is it getting me further away?
Well, one of the things that we talked about there's a difference paying down debt versus paying off debt. And to go down that road with infinite banking, I love the idea of implementing infinite banking. Really using these insurance policies is allowing us some time to change our thinking and to change our behavior. Because if somebody's in debt, there had to be something going on that put them in debt. There were decisions being made that put them into debt, and now they're wanting to get out of that. And what practicing, implementing the infinite banking concept does is forces us to slow down from either immediately paying off debt or going after the asset. And it's about getting control and access to some cash. And then in that position, now we can make some decisions, not just to pay down debt, but to pay off debt or to go create an asset. And I love the behavior that puts people into a place to be able to start to think differently.
The behavior is huge. I remember Nelson, he would come in and he would give that concept to where people would want to ask him, what's the best approach to paying off debt? Should I do exactly what we were saying? Should I take this cash and pay off the debt immediately and then start the insurance policy? And Nelson was always very philosophical in his approach. He'd always come back. And I remember one time he was saying, well, how long did it take the person to get into debt? Was this something that happened overnight? Or is this something that they've been working on for 10, 20, 30 years? Now, if someone has worked to get themselves into that kind of debt, and you're going to give someone advice to pay off the debt immediately without the potential of thinking of what the behavior is going to be like once that debt is paid off, you're missing the point. The behavior is important. He would say, I think you should take as long to pay off the debt as almost as it took you to get into it, because it takes a habit. You have to build in habit into your life. I think it's why in his book, Becoming Your Own Banker, he goes through the 5 human problems, because he understands the financial is important, but the emotion, the way that we see money and the way that impacts our life and others around us is even much more important. What do you think, Joey?
Yeah, no, I totally agree that our behaviors are much more important than the vehicles. And sometimes people get stuck on that. The real critical thing in my mind about debt and infinite banking, it kind of goes back to when we were talking about the different things like we love about infinite banking, we love about whole life insurance, is to me, it's the ability to be earning on the money that I would have otherwise have just spent and lost opportunity on. So for instance, if you are in the position where you have a surplus and every month you've got that extra money and you're like, okay, what do I do with it? And you're going to be paying down this debt anyway. And to your point, it took you a long time to get into that debt. It's going to take you a while to get out of it. Do you want to look back and let's say 3 years of chipping away at that debt and say, oh man, I did not put any of that money to work on my behalf. It all went to paying somebody else back for the debt that I incurred? Or would you have wished, just like we talk about trees being planted, I planted a tree 3 years ago and it's been growing the whole time on this cash flow I was going to pay the debt down with anyway? Man, how that to me is efficiency. That's like, wow, I can get 2 things done at the same time. And I've potentially, as Ernie said, I have started to even be able to think more about those behaviors and potentially change my thinking during that process. The other thing I'll mention about this is some people have really good intentions to pay off a debt over like 15 years. Like they want to change their mortgage to a 30-year to a 15-year, and they want to pay it off in 15 years because that was their intention at that time. But over the course of those 15 years, if they are just constantly putting money away into a policy, now they're sitting on a large, substantial amount of cash. And as we've said before, opportunities find cash. Is it possible that in those 15 years that you had this intention of paying off a mortgage, that a really amazing opportunity comes your way that you could take advantage of and still be in position to pay off your mortgage in the next 15 years anyway? Absolutely. And now we're really snowballing towards building the kind of lifestyle and the wealth that we want. Okay. I've heard enough about infinite banking. I'm pretty sure it's a fit for me and my family, Russ. How do I get started?
Let's take that pretty sure and make it darn sure. Reason you do that is that you get clarity, Joe. You need to get on a 15-minute call with one of our coaches at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/free call.
Then you'll know where you're starting from and where you're headed. And only then can you implement the infinite banking process.
All right. So go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/free call to get that 15-minute conversation, gain clarity. But now let's jump back into today's episode. So let's take this. And we said we were going to go through a practical case study. I think it's important to try to apply some of this. And if you're not in our inner circle, you need to take advantage of that. You go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/inner circle. Not only do you get to watch this live, but you also get to ask live questions. Each week, our coaches take questions from our inner circle members to help them in the implementation phase of infinite banking and applying that to debt and applying that to how do we look at buying assets. But we're going to go deep into this case study and we're going to be writing this out. But I just want to conceptually, let's talk about examples, right? Because the average American out there who's sitting in debt, who has credit cards, who has student loans, who has car loans, and yes, maybe they have a little extra money, at the end of every month. Let's just call it $1,000. And maybe they've stuck some money off to the side. Maybe they've done a decent job of having, say, $5,000 as a quote unquote emergency reserve. And they're looking at these 3 debts, student loans and credit cards and cars, and they're going, should I take this extra money? Should I take this money I've built up and pay it off? Mark, what would you tell that person? What would be the philosophy and framework that you would start giving feedback to this individual?
Wait. Before Mark jumps in, explain. You kind of like glossed over some of the details. We need to give the actual case study, don't we? I mean, don't you think that would be important?
Go ahead, jump in there. Yeah, I didn't want to get too deep in the numbers just because of the situation. It's maybe hard to follow the numbers, but go ahead.
Well, man, if you're listening, we want to make sure you can try to follow this along. They have $5,000 worth of cash they saved up. They got $1,000 a month of cash flow. A student loan they owe $8,000. It's $125 a month. They got a credit card that's $12,000 owed at 18%. It's $300 a month. And they've got a car that's $20,000 owed at 6%. That's $600 a month. These are real life numbers that so many people are facing. And so we want to make this extremely practical. So now, Mark, I just feel like people needed to hear those details before you started, talking through how you would talk about it.
Wow. Okay. We've got to we've got to have that discussion. Where are you at in your world? Where are we trying to get to? Okay. What's our goal? What's our plan? What's our strategy? When we know that, now we're kind of at this, we've got the numbers on the table, but let's take a gander at what our options are. The priority payoff guide, fantastic place to start. Let's take a look at that and we can target which one of those would move down that road. But other than that, I would say if we're looking to just pay off debt and be done with the day, well, that's one conversation. But are we looking at our long-term game? And if we are, I'd say, well, let's take a look and see what would a policy setup look like? How could we use that to leverage ourselves to move through these debts that we have? Because one of the things that I like to share with people, and I believe it's an eye-opener because it was one for me, is if you and I both have a car and we both owe the exact same amount, but you owe a car lender and I've borrowed from my policy, and we both come into $5,000 of cash, which is exactly how much we owe on the car. So we both decide, hey, let's take that $5,000 and let's pay off our cars. You pay off your car loan to the car lender. I pay off the loan to my infinite banking policy. If 2 days down the road, the car blows all 4 tires, shreds the axle and the drivetrain, and it costs $5,000 to fix it, are you going to be able to go back to the lender and say, hey, can I get that $5,000 back? No, that ship has sailed, that door has closed. Can I go back to my policy and take that $5,000, take another $5,000 loan, take those $5,000 back out and use them? That's the access to cash. That's what we're talking about. That's the leverage that you can have and that flexibility to manage. Personally, me as the owner of my bank, I give myself the best terms, the best rate, the most flexibility. When hard times arise, I'm willing to work with myself and my lending. Is the bank willing to work with you?
No doubt. JD.
I think, when we look at this just right on the surface, most people would approach this absent of context or absent of strategy. Right? Meaning I think they would just kind of line this up and say, you know what, I'm going to do this based on the debt snowball method. And I'm going to go after the smallest debt first, which is the student loan balance, right? The $8,000. And I'm going to throw $1,000 or $5,000 at that and then pay that off. And then when that's done, I'm going to take that payment and snowball it into the next smallest debt. And so I think most people would go into this situation without a real concrete strategy other than, I just want to get rid of the debt as quickly as possible. And what I think is interesting is as important as it is to get out of debt. Yes, we have to figure out what is the impact this has on my cash flow, which is important, which I think is why we look at the strategy, the payoff guide. But in addition to that is that you can't pay off the cost of living. And I think whenever we go into situations without a strategy, right, we end up taking all this excess cash flow. We try to pay off all these debts without a rhyme or a reason what we're doing. We keep kind of repeating the same patterns of behavior over and over and over again. And we just end up living hand to mouth. We never feel like we actually get ahead. And I don't know if anybody else has ever felt like that before, but I know I have felt that way before, is where I constantly feel like I'm building and I'm burning, I'm building and I'm burning, but I'm never actually getting ahead because I don't understand the implications of how we actually pay this off in context of what we're actually trying to achieve, which is financial freedom. I don't want to wait 30 or 40 years to become financially free. And being financially free doesn't mean being debt free.
That's a great point. JD, I like how you say that you cannot pay off the cost of living. because monthly expenses, sometimes people just assume that we're talking about debt. But as we both know and all know that, I mean, the cost of living is constantly increasing every single year. So you find yourself disappointed if you've made your whole goal to be debt free and you still can't be truly free. I also love the fact, like Mark, you mentioned, there's an actual risk factor to paying down debt the way that the rest of the world may think, is that you've now tied up all your liquid cash because you're trying to be disciplined to pay down these debts systematically. And when you need money back, you're at somebody else's terms and conditions again. Right. And there's a much better way when you have control through the infinite banking concept. So anyways, I like what you had to say there. Ernie,
you got any points to add into this?
Yes, I do. I can't get past this, but my number one reason why I think people should implement infinite banking is exactly what you're talking about there, is the freedom, putting those things together. Think about the all-American boy that Nelson talks about in the beginning of his book, who's sending, of every dollar he makes, 34.5 cents he's sending to some other institution. And those people are making a great living off of him. So for that person to be able to take control of the banking function in their life by having access to cash is so huge. One of the things, so I'm going to use this as my one thing that I would say. One of the things that Nelson would talk about a lot is just this dependence factor. And I know that the person listening to this podcast, the person listening to this right now, you are most likely not thinking this way, because that's not the type of person that we typically talk with. But when we're talking about paying off debt, we're looking at a student loan, a credit card, and a car loan. And I'm afraid, I hear this just in some of my community and circles, is this thought process. Well, I've heard that our president might absolve some of my student loan debt. And I've heard that I'm going to get another stimulus check. So actually, I'm not going to pay off any of those things. I'm going to open this new credit card and buy a boat. I'm afraid that's what the majority of people's thought processes are. And it's not so much paying down debt. It's really, I'll pay this down only if somebody else doesn't do it for me. And I'm going to do it at the very end. And financial freedom is the furthest thought from them. They think, I'll get there when I'm 70, 75, 80, way down the line.
Well, and I think that's hard, right? That sometimes that thought process of someone else taking care of it is maybe what got them into the position from the beginning. And debt is not something that comes upon us lightly. We get in there, right? These expenses is something that it's not like, wait a second, where did that come from? You know,
how'd that guy sneak in there?
Yeah, like car loan. What are you talking about, car loan? Right? I mean, we know these things happen, and we see them. And Joey, you asked me this, and I love the way that you challenge our audience constantly with this phrase: is the decision you make getting you closer to financial freedom or further away? And the purpose here is not to think from a scarcity mindset that we need to reduce our monthly expenses as small as possible, eliminate all debts, don't buy boats, don't buy cars, don't have fun. That's not the thing. I had a conversation this weekend with one of my nephews, and he's reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he said to me, hey, Uncle Russ, I'm listening to the book. I'm loving it. I'm like, give me one takeaway. He said, I love the fact that in the book, Robert Kiyosaki talked about how he bought a Porsche with the cash flow that came from some of his rental property.
His dream car.
I'm glad he continued that statement, because if he's real excited about him buying a Porsche, you may like, man, you're a little misled here.
Well, no, but I think he was excited about the Porsche, right? I mean, who doesn't get excited about a nicer car? But how did he purchase it? He didn't take his active income and say, okay, now I'm going to carve out, $1,000 a month to make the car note on this Porsche payment, which then that means that's 25% or 50% or 10% of my monthly income. That he didn't think that way. Right. He thought, I've got to go create an asset that will produce the income to cover this debt. And I think that's the mindset we see as people are coming to us and they're wanting that case study. They're wanting to say, how do I get out of debt? efficiently. And what we're saying is that there is a path, there is a plan to get out of debt. It just might be going through a different route than you expected it to.
All right. Can I bring up one of the most obvious objections to this idea and just get your take on it real quick, guys?
Go ahead.
So someone listening, they've been considering infinite banking, and they know that they don't have access to every dollar immediately when they start a new policy. So are you telling me that I should delay paying off a debt to start this policy? Like, isn't that what you're saying? If you tell me to start a policy first? Mark, how would you respond to that?
It depends. But for the most part, I would say right now, is your debt structured? Does it have set terms? Are you meeting those debt obligations as it is? Are you able to live your life currently as the way it is? Yes. Okay. Now we know where you stand today. If we start this tree today, we can see where it's going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. If we have to wait 3, 4, 5 years for these debts to be paid off, which, hey, you know what? If that's what you want to do, if that's your path, then that's great. I'm not here to tell you that you're right or wrong. I'm here to show you options. But let's also take a gander at, do we know what your health is today? Do we know what your health is going to be tomorrow? Because there's other factors involved in infinite banking, right? There's insurability. And if we delay setting this up, if tomorrow all of a sudden we're uninsurable, well, we have potentially closed one of those doors to achieving that avenue. And now we have to get some other aspects in there. So that would be my pieces of the puzzle on the table for you to put together as you choose.
JD, what about you? How'd you respond to that?
First and foremost, look, debt is defined as owing more than what you own, right? So in other words, if I have $100,000 in cash and I owe $100,000 on my house, say for example, am I in debt? No, because I could pay it off whenever I want, right? So technically I'm not in debt. And I think when we evaluate things in light of like what is the definition of debt, right? It's when I owe more than what I can afford to pay. And I think that's important because, yes, technically if I start a policy, I would delay getting out of debt, but compared to what? Right? What am I giving up by not doing the policy, which is all the lost opportunity cost on those dollars forever. And, it's interesting. I'm finally starting to get my wife on board with this. I really want to get grass turf in our backyard, and grass turf is not cheap. Apparently, I did not know this.
It's about $12,000 a square. What is it? I was looking at this the other day.
It's like $8 to $8.50 a square foot.
Yeah, it's like $12 a square foot is what I saw in Alabama, but.
Well, come to Texas. It's a little cheaper over here. But so my wife is like, that's a lot of money. We could do these other things. And I said, sweetie, listen, if I could take this money and go put it into an asset that could produce X, and it could pay for the quote debt, if we finance the turf, and it doesn't impact our cash flow, would that be okay with you? And then once the turf is paid off, we still own the cash flow. And she said, well, can we also do that for some other home renovations? Right. And so, right. And so the point though is like, once you start to think differently, right, about the way of how we're looking at structuring debt and the purpose and like what debt really is, right. I think it allows us to view things totally differently in how we make financial decisions, rather than what can I do to get to, as we say all the time, like I'm chasing zero, right? I'm constantly trying to get all of my debt down to zero, when I don't think that's actually the objective. I think the objective is, how do I actually get to financial freedom?
Right. Well, and you said something a second ago, and one of our mentors mentioned this week. I was listening to his podcast. He says, when you have the ability to write a check to get rid of your problem, you don't really have a problem. And that's what you were saying. If I had the cash that was equal to the debt, I don't really have a problem. Now, those who have no cash, who have no assets, they're the ones with the problem, right? That's why they feel the pain of debt. That's why debt is so overwhelming, because their cars, their houses, the other things that they owe in relationship to how much money they actually have freely accessible to them is so much magnified, so much multiplied. And that's what we're talking about. IBC is getting your money into one place. Today we were going through a conversation as we wrap this up. I want to bring this up. I think it's important, is that an asset is anything that puts money into your pocket, right? It's anything that creates cash flow that puts it into your pocket. But if you have to sell that thing in order to put money in your pocket, it's no longer an asset because it's no longer in your column. The reason infinite banking is so crucial in this part is that if we set up this insurance policy correctly, we put cash in it, and then we take a loan against that policy to go pay off the debt, we haven't had to sell the asset. We still have the ability to create cash flow. That's why this mindset helps people get closer to financial freedom. There's not a one size fits all. I'm going to say it again. If you need to understand how infinite banking plays out in your goals toward getting toward financial freedom, whether it's to eliminate debts or define assets, set up a free call. Go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/free call. Have that conversation. Talk to these coaches about how you can implement. Join the inner circle. This is where we're about to go right now. We're about to have a deeper discussion. Thank you for jumping onto this podcast today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have an amazing day.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.